On today's Transport Evolved, Toyota ruffles some feathers, 2 cars turn 4, and we pick the headlines and the facts apart. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 222 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, 21st of December 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield, and I'm your usual host into the world of future transport, evolved transport, if you will. If it's cleaner, greener, smarter, and safer, we cover it here on Transport Evolved. Just an apology, we didn't have a show last week for various reasons. I won't go into it now in the show, but I hope you'll forgive me for not having a show last week. But we're back. We're back next week as well. We've got a review, end-of-year show today. And we've got 2 fantastic guests for our penultimate show of 2014. First up, all the way from Southern California, Mr. Paul Scott of Plug in America and My Lunch with the Barmer, amongst other things. Hello, Paul. How are you today?
Very good, and happy solstice to everybody.
Happy solstice to you too. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Obviously, I'm not that far from Stonehenge, and I was watching the pictures this morning of people who'd got up early to go and see the winter solstice. The longest night or the shortest day, whichever way you want to look at it. It just means we're getting closer to summer, right? That's the way of looking at it.
That's the best way to look at it. You bet.
Yep. And it's interesting, actually, from an anthropological point of view, all the different cultures that celebrate the shortest day rather than the longest day. And these days, people tend to celebrate the longest day rather than the shortest day. But actually, you know, our ancestors did it the other way around. They celebrated the shortest day. Someone who I'm sure doesn't really need to worry too much about winter, although he is wearing a Father Christmas hat. Joe Dugandzic, all the way from Arizona. How are you, Joe?
I'm doing great. How are you, Nikki?
I'm all right. We've had a few technical problems here today, but we're solving them. You know how we are. We're very good.
Yes, it's a chilly 53 degrees here this morning.
53. Chilly.
Which feels colder in the desert because it's drier. It's a dry cold.
That is very true. But I will contest that I think cold feels worse when you're damp.
Well, that's true.
Because,
is true.
You know, I'm from East Anglia, and we get very cold and very damp in that part of the world. But, you know, I'm sure it's nice in Arizona at this time of year. I am only ever going to visit Arizona on a day like today.
Right.
What's the hot temperature supposed to be?
Oh, about 65?
65. That's hot. That's nearly too hot for me. Nearly too hot for me. All right. So, Joe, you've been driving a Nissan Leaf for 3 years now? 2 years?
2 years. Almost 2 years. Yeah, coming up.
And you've lost a battery bar?
I've lost one battery bar a couple months ago, and I recently, since the last time I was on the show, I finally moved into a new place, and I have a place to plug in at night, and it is absolutely fantastic.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And
I've had a challenge with that over my life of having the Leaf.
And Paul, you used to sell Leafs, didn't you, for a while?
I did. I sold them from just before they were launched in 11 and up until about, I guess it was May this year when I retired.
You don't retire, Paul. Retirement is not something in your vocabulary. Now, come on.
I don't have to motorcycle and commute to downtown LA anymore. That's really nice.
So as we're coming to the end of 2014, I would like you, gents, to tell me your favourite story this year. Now, I'm guessing you're both going to pick an electric car story, both being electric car drivers and advocates. But I've got one as well that I'll share with you after I've asked you both. So, Joe, I think you were going to go first. Tell us your big pick story of the year, the thing that's made you really excited.
And we were chatting about this right before we started because I wanted to make sure I had my facts correct. And apparently this was really a story that broke at the end of last year, but they've made more news this year, especially very recently. And that's Tesla announcing the startup now of the battery swapping stations. I don't remember how many they're going to have initially, at least one, obviously, but I really think this is a very good step in the right direction for battery electric vehicles. We obviously remember a few years ago with Better Place, their technology, which unfortunately went nowhere. But Tesla has the clout and has the money to put this in place. And I think that it's going to be important because we're still, I occasionally, I can charge my Leaf overnight. And if I really am in a pinch, I will go over to our local Nissan dealer a couple miles away, which has a free level 3 charging, quick charge. So I can do it in 30 minutes or less.
Right.
But some people are still thinking 30 minutes is too long. They want it to be in 5 minutes or less, like they're used to with gas vehicles or internal combustion engine, or however we want to mention that. So I think the battery swap is, if it works, if other automakers could adopt such a thing, if one day we perhaps could have some sort of universal battery standard that may be a while off, I think that's going to be really important for the future in getting more people to adopt battery electric vehicles.
Interesting. Well, I'm not going to talk to that story right now because we're going to cover it later on in the show. It's in the show notes for today. So we'll move on, but I've got some points that I'll come back to you on later on in the show. Paul, what was your favourite story of 2014 so far?
Well, it's also Tesla related, and I have to say the announcement of the P85D, the dual motor car, with phenomenal performance specifications. And in addition to the performance, 0 to 60 in 3.2, which is pretty much off the charts, the autonomous car, or the autonomous driving technology that they're building in, the ability to change lanes just by signaling and let the car change the lane for you. A car has adaptive cruise control, and it's a good start on the autonomous car. And I think as we see these technologies incorporated into cars, and it's a lot of companies doing it, GM, of course, and Ford and Mercedes and many of the others have announced autonomous cars. So as this technology gradually gets internalized into various high-end cars and then filters down into the lower, the populace will be brought into autonomous driving without having an abrupt, from nothing to full autonomous. And so over the years, people will become very comfortable with it. And then when the fully autonomous cars come in 6, 7, 8 years from now, we'll be used to it and we'll adapt to it very readily.
Did anyone see the video about the where the new the Tesla the 85D went up against the Ferrari?
Yes. That's insane. It's interesting that you pick out the D. I might feel differently once I've driven one, but I am totally underwhelmed by the P85D. Completely, totally underwhelmed. I think it's because I grew up on a dairy farm, and for me, a car that can go anywhere is more important than a car that can go really quickly. That's not to say I don't enjoy fast cars, but I've just got off a week of 4 days. I had to go back early because I was cracking the windscreen. But I borrowed a Tesla Model S 60, and actually I reckon that's a more important, influential car than the 85, just because it's a lower price and it makes things a lot more affordable. I agree with you on the autonomy, though, Paul. That's a very important story of the year. I think one of my important stories of the year is the news that vehicle-to-grid technology is becoming more mainstream. So it's kind of all of those vehicle-to-grid technology stories, the ones where we look at electric cars being used as temporary storage to help smooth out the peaks and the troughs in the grid, the advent, the real push this year of V2G technology by Nissan specifically, working really hard on getting these off-grid storage solutions working. Okay, only a demonstrator project at the moment, but it shows promise. Ford's been working on V2G this year. GM's been working on V2G this year, and Tesla has been talking about using these used battery packs as storage for cars. And I think actually that moves plug-in vehicles in general away from being just a transport solution, but also being a backup power solution. And I don't want to sound an alarmist, but if you think about some of the the geological activity that we are due at any point in the world, having backup power is really, really important to modern society, and it can. I think actually that's in some ways more important than travel. Being able to keep things running, being able to keep, hospitals running, schools running, homes running, air conditioning or cooking or whatever you need running from your car, at least for a short period of time in an emergency, is a really important one for me. All right. So, Paul, I want you to talk to me now about a study that was recently carried out by Plug in America. We've seen falling oil prices, really dramatically falling oil prices at the moment, and those who've been following the news of late will know that Russia's in a real bad state at the moment because the price of oil is dropping, and Russia's economy is basically built on the oil and gas industry at the moment. People have been saying, we've been seeing all these headlines saying, oh, people aren't going to buy electric cars anymore because the price of gasoline's dropping. It's in the US as well as the UK, all around the world, in fact. But there's a really interesting study, isn't there, from Plug in America, Paul? Can you tell us about that? And I suppose the conclusion that it came to, which might not be what a lot of people would suspect.
Well, what the study found is that the obtaining of electric cars has not dropped off dramatically because of the price of oil going down, which was counter to what I thought would happen. I honestly thought we would get the other result. But I think what it demonstrates is that there is a strong demand for electric cars above and beyond the economics of it. There are a lot of people out there who understand that climate change is real and it's human caused, and transportation, particularly internal combustion transportation, is a big part of that. So they are taking steps personally to reduce their contribution to that. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that that more and more people are really starting to take this issue seriously and are making personal changes to their lifestyles to remove themselves from the problem. And as the price of oil goes back up, which inevitably it will, we'll see a resurgence and a huge increase in the purchasing of electric vehicles, particularly when the longer range affordable cars come out, the Tesla Model 3, the second generation Nissan, and so forth.
It's a very valid comment you're making there, and I think also the price of oil will eventually go up. I listened to something this week on OPB that was talking about the shale industry in the US is on the brink of having some major issues, not necessarily the big explorations, but some of the smaller businesses associated with shale exploration, because the cost of gas and oil is dropping so much at the moment that these companies that are kind of supporting the exploration are having to drop their prices. They're going out of business, or they will be going out of business, because at the moment it's OPEC and some of the other nations, or the OPEC, obviously the OPEC nations and the non-OPEC nations, they're all still want to produce oil and gas. And that leaves America, and America can choose to carry on producing or stop producing to help the price. What was I going to say? Joe, it does sound a little bit like the change from people using incandescent light bulbs to using LEDs and CFLs. That same transition, when energy prices go up, people start to think of ways to save energy. But once those energy prices start dropping again for whatever reason, people go, actually, no, why would I have something that uses more energy when I don't need to?
Right. No, it's true. Although something that's occurred in, say, the this light bulb industry is the fact that they've simply phased out the old incandescent light bulbs. Pretty much at the end of this year now, the majority of those bulbs can't be manufactured anymore. So obviously the government hasn't done that with internal combustion engines in ICE vehicles. But I have a feeling people will make that decision over the next couple of years. I think, and like you were saying, some people, may do it for the economic advantage. Some people may do it for, let's say the planet advantage. But I think other people also, people who are just sort of car people and like to drive fun cars, also discover after knowing someone with an electric car, taking a test ride or a test drive, that electric vehicles are really fun to drive. They're just such a different type of driving experience from what they're used to.
Right.
But so, I mean, I think it's a few factors, but, it is sort of a similar thing. People just think, well, why keep wasting gas and wasting money if I don't have to, even if it is cheap?
Paul, just a second. I just want to check that you can hear me okay, because your audio is a bit crackly coming through, but I'm hoping you can hear me okay.
You're fine.
Yeah, because you're breaking in and out there a bit, so I want to make sure that everything is okay at your end. Okay. Right. We'll now go on to a story that you've been following a lot, Joe. Which is not necessarily connected with what we would think of when we talk about evolved future transport, but it actually is. It's quintessentially evolved future transport.
It is.
It's evolved mass future transport. And of course, we're talking about Elon Musk's Hyperloop. Now, there was a piece this week in Jalopnik which really ripped Tesla apart and Musk apart for promising all these things and not delivering on any of them. And I'm not going to say one way or another how I feel about that, because part of the article I agreed with and part of the article I didn't agree with. But as part of that, they were talking about the fact that Elon Musk hasn't brought the Hyperloop to fruition. But of course, when Elon Musk detailed the Hyperloop, he said he wasn't going to make it. Now, you've been following the Hyperloop development, so tell us where things are at the moment.
Well, they just released, and if I think we read the same article or a derivative thereof. They basically released another study and said, okay, it's, we continue to look at it as it's feasible, it's possible.
Who are we talking about here? We're talking
about
Musk
I think it's HTT. They enthusiasts, if I don't have the article in front of me, enthusiasts of the Hyperloop concept formed a corporation or a development company. I think it was Hyperloop Transport Technologies, whatever it's called,
right.
To work on developing this, because Musk released it as like an open source project. So they've been moving this thing along, trying to get funding for it and whatnot. They've been doing these studies and whatnot. So they released a study saying, yes, it is feasible. We can go from LA to San Francisco and back in an hour or so. And that's all great. And it's cheaper than building what they wanted to do traditionally in California, which was the traditional high-speed rail line, which is very, very expensive because of many different factors, land acquisition and all that. But some of those factors still factor in to the Hyperloop, which is about $16 million per mile at their current estimate. I think the Hyperloop is a great idea. It's for people who aren't familiar with it, the best way to describe it is the old-fashioned pneumatic bank tube concept, where basically you get in this pod-like thing, and through a lot of science and technology, it'll move you at about 600 miles an hour.
Right.
Now, something that most people, and I'll just do this for like 15 seconds real quick, you can also, if you're interested in this concept, you can look up another concept which was out before Musk's Hyperloop called ET3, Evacuated Tube Technologies, another consortium of people who apparently have a patented system of the almost exact version of a bank tube where it's entirely a complete vacuum inside, and it can go apparently 4,000 miles an hour and take you from the US to China in 2 hours. But that's a little scary for most people, I think, traveling at that speed.
And underwater as well. I mean, it wouldn't scare me traveling that speed. It would be the underwater thing.
The underwater piece. So we have a lot of these concepts coming out, and many of them, I just think, because of their scale, obviously they've got to be tested, they've got to be deployed, someone's got to fund them. It seems to be that the transit, like mass transit systems, are generally not the hot topic these days, although I think they really should be, especially for venture capitalism. And then there's, of course, my favorite system, which is Skytran, which is a little bit lower speed, but you have individual pods that can basically take you kind of anywhere on an elevated city grid and cross-connect between cities. I think some of these technologies are a little further along. I think the Hyperloop is great between cities. I just think we're still waiting on someone to sink a bunch of money into it and say, we're going to do this. But again, then you've got to get the state involved and whatnot.
Right. And
I think it's great.
Sorry,
I think we're going to see a number of these technologies all eventually come into fruition because they all have their pluses and minuses.
Right. And Paul, there might be some challenges in California, right? Because California is famous for its red tape.
Well, yeah, we have. It's pretty. That is why our fast trains are not running yet. It's being dragged out in the courts now, and I wish them the best of success, but it's pretty tough to build something here because of that. And, you know, a Hyperloop would have the same issues in terms of land acquisition. Although if we use the I-5 corridor, we'd get rid of most of that. But yeah, California has its own special problems with that sort of thing. But yeah, I agree with Joe that this is a technology that should come into play over the next several decades. We're going to need it. It does sound like it's going to use a lot less electricity or less energy overall per person traveled or per person mile than virtually any other technology. And the speed, of course, you can't match it with even airplanes. So a lot of benefits there.
I always think it's ironic that there's so many challenges to getting things built in California because California is this innovative hub, Silicon Valley, and so many other things that have come out of California over many decades. Well,
what can I say? I think it will eventually come back. I think it has to. All right, two final stories for the segment. This past week we didn't have we didn't have a show for 2 weeks. So in the past fortnight, two cars have turned 4. Two plug-in cars, the Nissan Leaf and the Chevrolet Volt, both celebrated their 4th birthdays. You know, we're seeing some pretty amazing sales figures for both cars. Admittedly, the Volt has dropped in the US of late because obviously the 2016 Volt is going to be unveiled at the North American International Auto Show in Detroit, or the Detroit Auto Show, whichever way you want to talk about it, next month in January, less than 3 weeks' time, in fact. But the Leaf continues to sell really, really well. And my question to you guys is, what's the impact of both of these cars been on the general car market as well as the plug-in and green car market? And have they really become ubiquitous when we talk about green or plug-in cars? Or do we think that your average man and woman on the street looks at that and just thinks of it as another car? They don't look at those vehicles and think electric. Now, I think it probably depends on where you live in the world and what the local attitude is. But let's start with Paul.
Well, I have to say that the average person here, even in Los Angeles, and I would probably say San Francisco as well, doesn't think twice about these cars. They don't know they're electric. It's just another car on the road. That's the vast majority of people. The only people who know about it are the people who are paying attention or who know somebody who has a car. And that's where our hope lies is, the person who bought one, his neighbors are going to see it, his coworkers are going to hear about it, and his family's going to hear about it. So that's where the growth is coming from. It's really word of mouth. The average person on the street doesn't know anything about it. I'll give you a good example. I gave a talk 2 weeks ago at the Center for Inquiry in Hollywood, which is a kind of an offshoot of the Skeptic Society. And these are smart people. These are people who believe in science and understand energy and all this. And I gave my talk, and while many of them knew about electric cars, not all of them knew very much and were under false impressions that they had heard and not followed up on. And you would think these are the kind of people who would follow up on them if anybody would.
Right.
So I was kind of surprised by that. I did get really good questions from them. But again, it led me to believe that, our work is still cut out for us. We've got to get the word out about these cars more than we have been. And unfortunately, OEMs are not helping a lot. The advertising, the marketing for electric cars is, in my opinion, quite abysmal. They're not doing a good job of it. They need to step that up. But unfortunately, the OEMs are the wrong ones for that, because in order to properly market an electric car, you pretty much have to denigrate the rest of your product line. And that's been a problem all along.
Joe?
Yeah, I would have to agree. And, it's been, almost 2 years since I got my Leaf. And, the times that I get more interaction from the public are when I am plugged in or, plugging into an EV charger, which doesn't happen many days nowadays because I plug in at home. But most people, I think, do see them just generally as a regular car. I almost, if it wasn't under a lease and I didn't feel like if I wanted to spend the extra money, I've almost thought of doing a big vehicle wrap on the car with a giant message saying, "Hey, this is an electric car. Isn't it really cool? Come up and ask me questions about it." To just be a little more in your face, even though they've got the little, the badging, zero emission and whatnot. I do have to say that I do see more of them on a regular basis. I actually, I was at, unrelated story, at a Phoenix area drone meetup because I fly a drone for aerial photo purposes at work yesterday. And there was another red Nissan Leaf, like 2 spots down from me, which is matching the color that I have. So I do see more Volts. I do see more Leafs on the road. I can't say I see them, thousands of them, but I do see more of them now than especially even a year ago or so, because they do continue to sell fairly well in their own context.
Interesting.
So it's an education thing. Are the car makers actually going to do better advertising? I don't know. I mean, it's such a small percentage of their whole lineup. The only electric car maker that's 100% is Tesla.
Yes.
At this point, so everyone else is just a sliver of their entire inventory. But at some point, the tide's got to turn. But I think it's still going to be just us educating people for a little while longer.
It's very interesting you guys mentioned that. I mean, I notice that people tend not to notice the Leaf or the Volt so much. The Volt tends to actually get more looks than the Leaf in the UK. Because
it's pretty different. I mean,
it's a pretty different
the styling is definitely different. I think people probably mistake them for hybrids just because, they're used to a Prius being on electric mode at low speeds in a parking lot. They just figure, it's another hybrid.
Yeah. And interestingly, though, last week when I had the 60, and I should point out, I had my mum and one of my sisters with me. We were off to see my other sister, who some of you may know has got cancer. So we were off to see her for Christmas and just sort of deliver presents and stuff. And so I'd got the 60 Tesla Model S 60 for the weekend. And I'd said to my sister and my mum, "Come on, I'll take you up to see our other sister." And we were driving along. And my mum said, "I feel like a film star because people just kept checking out the car as we were driving along. People kept checking the car out when it was plugged in and charging. People were checking the car out." She said, "Well, they're not checking me out." So I think also the Tesla gets a lot more attention, and I think people are aware of what the Tesla is, but maybe the other cars fall under the radar. All right, finally for the segment, and I'm aware we are running a bit over. We've got a recently announced program in Europe, which essentially mimics the battery replacement program that you guys already have in the US for the Nissan Leaf. And it means that you can buy a new Nissan Leaf battery pack, just like you can in the States now. You guys have already been using the Leaf replacement program. You've seen it run for a while. Obviously, Paul, as you said at the beginning of the show, used to sell Nissan Leaf, so there's your disclaimer. I'd just like you guys to give me your feedback on whether you think other automakers should start doing this kind of thing yet. Let's start with Joe.
Well, for we're talking about the replacement program.
Correct.
If your battery goes below a certain percentage.
Well, it's one where you can buy a new battery pack.
That's right. That's right. Yes. I think it should be ubiquitous. There shouldn't be these type of things should be across the board. If one car maker is going to do it, everyone should do it, because if people want to hold on to the car, which the car is not really going to, we know that the other components of the electric cars, the motors and the whatnot, are going to outlast the battery, then why should they not have the option?
Yeah.
I think I've seen some of the initial photos for the supposed second generation Leaf, and it looks distinctly different. And I kind of like the styling of my current car, but so I don't know. Sometimes you don't want to upgrade to the latest and greatest, but you may have to for the new battery pack. So I think it should be an option. Yes.
Paul.
Yeah, so I would agree with Joe. It's a good option to have, and and you do get a lot of efficiency if you can hold on to a particular car. That's the bulk of the cost, and if you can just replace batteries at a cost-effective rate, then you're going to keep that car for a lot longer. And the beautiful thing about electric cars is they just keep working. There's very little that goes wrong with them. So as the battery fades out, you put a new one in, and conceivably you could keep one 20 or 30 years. I know that we've got a lot of the RAV4s, the first generation RAV4 EVs with the nickel metal hydride packs that are out there, and the majority of them are on their second packs now, with one vehicle hitting over 250,000 miles. So these cars can go on and on for a long, long time just by swapping out the packs. So I think from an efficiency standpoint, it's a very good idea. From a cost standpoint, a very good idea. The used market for Leafs is really starting to take off now. So I see that having access to new batteries at a reasonable cost and 6,000 installed is a very reasonable cost. So I see it as a very good thing.
It's going to be interesting moving it forward, because I would like to see more people sort of in the second-hand and the used car market grab onto these vehicles, and people who can't afford brand new cars maybe saving up, buying a used Leaf or a used electric car and putting in a new battery pack. And I hope that all the automakers do it. I hope Tesla does it. I hope Nissan continues to do it. I hope Ford does it, Mitsubishi. They all need to do it, because otherwise future car technology becomes part of the consumer culture, which is you buy it brand new, you use it for a couple of years, and you throw it away. And we've been doing that for almost a decade now with things like smartphones. And I think we need to make sure that we don't do the same thing with cars, whether they be self-driving or anything else. It's one of the reasons why I like, going off on a bit of a tangent here. It's one of the reasons I like Tesla's autonomous drive technology, because they've put the technology in and the ability to upgrade the software remotely. And that can keep that technology fresh without requiring people to buy a new car every year, because there are people who would quite happily buy a new Tesla every year if it meant that they got the latest and greatest. And we don't need to emphasize that consumerism that we already have in the gadget world and extend that into the car world. And it's terrible here in the UK because people have this plate thing. I know you guys don't have it, but here we have a prefix or a suffix, or now we have something in the middle, actually, which denotes the year that the car was first registered, and that's license plate stays on the car unless you buy a personalized number plate. And so someone can look at my Nissan Leaf and immediately know it's a 2011 model because it's got an 11 in the middle of the license plate. Somebody can look at our Volt and know it's a 13 because it's got a 13 in the license plate. And so what you see in the UK is those who can afford to buy a new car every year or every 2 years or every 3 years are in this cycle of keeping up with the Joneses because they want to have a car with the latest number on. And when those registrations change, they change twice a year, they change in August and they change in the spring, people absolutely go crazy over buying the latest car with the latest plate. And there's a premium for it. And I don't think we need that. I don't think we need that attitude moving forward. Let's have a quick ad break, or rather, let's not have an ad break. In the show notes, if you're watching and following, it will say, hey, where's the ad gone? At this point in the show, we used to have an advert that encouraged you all to make a donation to Transport Evolved to keep the show running, to help us with the costs of the show. Unfortunately, though, we have been forced by a change in European law to end our donation programme. We've been advised by our accountants not to have the donation programme anymore, and that's because of something called VAT-MOSS, V-A-T-M-O-S-S. And essentially what that means, it's a whole new system that ensures that the person buying the service or making a donation pays the correct amount of tax for the country in which they live. Now, most of our donations were actually from the US and the UK rather than anywhere else in Europe. But the system means that we would have had to have carried out a large amount of due diligence and checks to make sure that everybody who donated, we had to prove that they lived in whichever country they lived in. We'd have to keep 2 lots of evidence, etc., etc. And it would have resulted in a lot of paperwork and a lot of admin time, and essentially would have cost us the same amount of money to do all of that record keeping as the donations we were getting. So we have temporarily stopped VATMOS. Stop the donations because of VATMOS. Those rules come into effect on the 1st of January, and it's across the whole of Europe. And you'll find that there are lots of people who either sell stuff online, whether it be artwork or digital services, who are shutting up shop. And it's a really sad thing. So if you want to support someone, you can't do it to us, but if you want to support someone before the end of the year who's an online artist or author or something else, or audiobooks, nudge, nudge, wink, wink to our good friend Mark Chatterley, who's still with us, who runs his own audiobook company, do that now, because come 1st of January, things are going to change. Right, on to part 2 of the show. Now, the title of today's show essentially comes from this next story, Wild Claims. Now, midweek, we watched as a series of headlines made, it was started on AP actually, the old adage of electric cars are not as environmentally friendly as gasoline vehicles. That was the soundbite. It linked to various stories, which eventually led back to one new scientific study that was published in an online scientific journal. And the headline was that if you run your electric car from the average power mix of the US, it's essentially worse for the environment than a gasoline car. The actual reality of it, though, Paul, was something completely different, wasn't it? I don't know if you read this. Did you read the study?
No, I never did get a hold of the study. I kept looking for it. The initial stories that carried it did not have a link to the study, although I've heard that it's available now.
Yeah, we linked to the original study, and we were one of the first news outlets to jump on this, because we were thinking, this doesn't make any sense. And we've talked to the researchers, and the researchers were very adamant that the headlines were not what they had said in the study. The study went thus. They examined 2020. They basically examined some scenarios for 2020 in which 10% of the predicted transport in 2020, i.e. the projections for how much traffic will be on the roads of the US in 2020, and taken 10% of that and figured out how much emissions would exist for the various forms of transport that we have and that we should have at that point, which included, I've got a list here, gasoline, gasoline hybrid, diesel, compressed natural gas, corn grain ethanol, corn stower ethanol, because they're produced in different ways, EV, electric vehicles from the national grid average at the moment in the US, EVs from coal, and then EVs from various other forms of energy. Now, in the opening sort of part of the abstract, it said electric vehicles charged from coal-based electricity are much worse for the environment than gasoline vehicles. A little bit further down, it said, however, electric vehicles charged from WWS, which stands for wind, water and solar, are far more environmentally friendly than any of the other choices here. And that fact was completely missed out by the headlines. Hearing that for the first time, Paul, what's your reaction?
So it was pretty clear to me, because I'd read of this, that some of the headline writers are just journalists with not very much skill or an agenda. And I think probably in both cases, and a good dollop of laziness. So if they had cared to read the story, they would have come out with a different headline. But some of these journalists are anti-EV. It's pretty clear. And so they pick on something, they pull it out of context, and they write what's essentially a lie in the headline.
That's clickbait.
It's clickbait. Yeah, exactly. And so they're doing a disservice to their public, to their readers. But here's the bottom line. It's very simple. The end goal is a complete renewable electric grid, 100%. That's the end goal. Whether we can get all the way there, or 90% of the way there, or 95% of the way there, that's to be determined in the future. But the goal is to clean the grid consistently and continuously, and we are doing that. So if anybody has an issue with driving an electric car on dirty energy, then clearly they're making a statement that they haven't taken the effort to get clean energy for their homes. They haven't done anything about that. They haven't looked into buying solar and installing it. They haven't looked into switching their home's electricity to a renewable program. They've done nothing to that. So they honestly don't care about the ill effects of dirty electricity, or they would have done it for their home. So they're making that admission by complaining about cars running on dirty electricity. There are many more reasons to drive a car on electricity rather than oil that have nothing to do with the environment. And they're massive. There's the whole military side of oil, which is gigantic. The U.S. is spending $80 billion a year on military protection for oil, exclusive of wars. And so the 7th Fleet, for instance, is in the Persian Gulf. Why? We have no strategic need to be in the Persian Gulf at all, except for oil. So the whole notion that there's some reason why you don't want to drive an electric car because of dirty electricity is, should be set aside. Anybody who makes those statements, you need to go right back at them and say, why haven't you bought clean electricity for your home? Why haven't you done that? If you don't like dirty electricity, don't run your home on that dirty electricity. It's all part of the oil industry's underhanded way of trying to depress the electric car market as best they can, and they get good results from this, because I hear people all the time, environmentalists, saying that electric cars are bad because of dirty electricity. So it's just
it's sad, isn't it? It really is. It is sad to see those claims coming again and again and again. I just want to draw people's attention actually in the show notes, and I would normally have the video at this point to play in the show, but for various reasons we haven't been able to bring you any of our VT today. But there is a video in the show notes, a YouTube video, and I don't know what the official title of this is called. It's one of those, it's the style of video that's kind of become really popular in the last couple of years, where you actually see someone, the camera is over somebody's shoulder and you're watching them while they draw
yeah, what
out.
is up with these crazy cartoon writing
really
videos?
Great, though.
And they're all like 45 minutes long.
They're so brilliant. Well, this one's actually only about 4 minutes long, or 3 minutes long. It's very well done. And its actual title is Life Cycle Air Quality Impacts Life Cycle Air Quality Impacts of Light Duty Transportation Video Abstract. I can show you that there. It's on the show notes. Please watch it at the end of the show, because this was produced by the same team who produced the study. And it's very, very fair. And it's essentially pointing out, as the authors have said to me, and we're going to try and get the authors on a show in the future, the cars are not the problem. The transportation is not the problem. It's where the power, where the energy for those vehicles comes from. And
exactly.
It's the same whether you're talking about hydrogen, whether you're talking about gasoline, whether you're talking about electricity, whether you're talking about some unknown fuel that we haven't yet examined. And one of the things, I mean, I suppose that the actual fuel type that gets most criticized in this video and in the study is ethanol. Corn-based ethanol, because of the emissions. These guys are all about the total emissions that have been created, growing the fuel, refining the fuel, pumping the fuel, storing the fuel, etc., etc., etc. And they followed this through. And it's a very thorough study, and I think the guys who studied, who came up with this, have been given some really bad press. And I think it's indicative of our soundbite culture, Joe.
It is.
How do we counter this? This is a major problem as a society.
You counter it with the truth. I was when I saw the article come out, or the articles about this study come out, which was earlier this past week. I was very upset actually, because I said I thought this debate was over. Like, why are we still having this misinformation come out? And that's what it is. At the end of the day, well, and maybe some of my information was incorrect, but at some point I had actually been under the impression that even if your electricity came from coal, you were still marginally better in terms of efficiency and cleaner than a regular old, gasoline, powered vehicle.
I think it depends whether you're talking, sorry to interrupt, I think it depends whether you're talking particulate emissions and greenhouse gases combined. Because obviously coal has a lot of particulate matter.
Right, exactly. Just like diesel does.
Right.
So I think it's probably very, very close. So I mean, obviously you want to be on a cleaner energy source for your electric car. But I think it really is just getting the truth out there. And it's not just that, but again, like Paul was saying, we've just got to continue to move towards this cleaner grid. Something I had the opportunity to go to California twice in 2 weekends, unplanned. Well, one was planned. The other one was kind of a last minute thing. And when we were going out to, it was, I think, San Diego, I had never seen one of these along the highway, but I saw my first utility scale solar plant with the full not the mirrors, but with a massive array of PV panels, and it just seemed to go on for miles. And I said, "Wow, this is really cool." I sort of just geeked out for a moment. And it was like, okay, this is like a real thing. You see it on Discovery Channel and on YouTube videos, but you don't really see these in person all that often. And I was just like, wow, this is so great that these things are actually here. And I think I was reading some other related article to all this stuff about the electric vehicles and the studies and energy and whatnot. And again, some people still question. They say, okay, it's now almost 2015. Why is it that Arizona and all these sunlight exposed areas of the desert Southwest that are exposed to sunlight, 340 or 50 days a year, are not just covered in panels? We could generate all of the power for the entire country.
It is insane,
in a condensed area. It's stupid. It's just stupid. But like you said, it's the lobbyists, it's the money, where that's going, it's the politicians, it's the oil. But I'll just say this one last thing. At some point, we know it's going to happen, no matter how we keep sort of trying to extract it through different methods. We're going to run out of cheap oil. We're going to run out of cheap dinosaur-based fuel sources. So at some point, the scale has got to tip. We're hoping that it simply doesn't go where, some people predicted, to where there will be this change. There will be no more cheap oil. They will send the entire world into a panic, and we'll all go back to the dark ages. But we can mitigate that by moving to a cleaner source of power starting today.
And it's an interesting thing as well. I mean, let's not even go to the politics of the solar taxes that have now been, I think Florida's now voted one in. I know Arizona has one. This idea of I think, I can't remember if it's Arizona or Florida, one of those states.
Arizona's trying, but they're going to make another decision here in the next couple months about that.
There's one state that's trying, if it hasn't already passed, a law that says you have to be connected to the grid. You can't be off grid. Is that Florida?
Yeah. And I think Arizona's trying to do that.
It's crazy. Right. All right. This week, French automaker Renault announced that the 2015 Renault Zoe, which is the electric hatchback, and the 2015 Renault Kangoo ZE, which is kind of an electric minivan. It's not a van. It's not a commercial van that you would expect in the States, but it's used as a commercial van in Europe. It's available as a panel van and also as a 5-seat passenger van, although they sell it still as a commercial vehicle. These vehicles will come with an updated motor, controller and inverter system for 2015. Now, the motor output is the same, but it's going to be a more efficient motor. In the Zoe, talking about a range improvement of 10% to 20%, an improved low speed charge, so improved efficiency when charging at home, which means that it takes less time to charge even at the same power, so less energy is lost due to heat, so it's more efficient at a lower speed. But the trade-off is The Zoe will no longer be able to charge at 43 kilowatts AC three-phase. It will now only be able to charge up to 22 kilowatts AC. So instead of your 80%, 0 to 80% charge taking half an hour at a rapid charge station, it will now take an hour. Now, it's interesting because the Kangoo up to this point has only had a 3 kilowatt onboard charger, no rapid charging available. The Kangoo now does get rapid charging, but I'm interested to see what you guys think. Is it a sensible option to drop the speed of the charging in favour of making charging more easy at home? These vehicles, Renault's saying that the majority of its customers charge between 3 and 11 kilowatts. Paul, what are your views on this?
Yeah, if you're charging at home, it really doesn't matter. Unless you're driving 80 or 90 miles a day, level 1 charging will probably take care of you at home, depending on how long you're at home, of course. But most people are home for at least 12 or 13 hours.
Right.
And workplace charging can feed into that. Stores, shopping malls, things like that. Wherever you go, the general rule we tell people is ABC: always be charging. Near a plug, man, just plug it in. If you're only going to get a mile extra of range, well, that's a mile that you might need. But in general, as long as it's more efficient, I'm in favor. These cars are not made for long distance driving anyway. If you really need to drive a long distance a lot, you should be in a plug-in hybrid like the Volt. Right. I don't see a big issue with that. Faster charging is always good, but if they can charge at 22 kilowatts, that's pretty darn fast.
That is pretty fast. Yeah. And I've got to admit that, it's been interesting this week. Obviously, we don't have level 1 charging in Europe. We have 220 to 30 volts as standard. So all of our basic level charging is equivalent of level 2. We don't call it level 2, we call it type 2. Level 2 charging is essentially 3 kilowatts. If you charge from a domestic outlet, it might go down to 2.5, 2.7, maybe 2, depending on the actual car. But generally, we can charge a bit faster from a household outlet than you guys can in the States.
Oh, that's right, because of 220.
Because of 220. Now, interestingly, I've had a lot of Renault Zoe owners contact me and Transport Evolved going, this is ridiculous. We want our 43 kilowatts. Interestingly, though, I've also heard from a lot of Zoe owners that are going, well, 43 kilowatts doesn't actually work anyway. These AC three-phase charging stations have been notoriously unreliable. There are only 2 cars on sale in Europe that use the Type 2 three-phase onboard rapid charge stations. They are the Renault Zoe and the Tesla Model S, which has the Type 2 socket. It's got a different socket in Europe to the States. And so our superchargers have the same connector on as the Zoe, as the Zoe charger.
So that's a different standard from the level 3 on the Leaf. Is that right?
Right, different standard. And the Leaf, the DC charging stations have been pretty reliable, but the AC ones haven't. And so a lot of people are saying, well, that's not very reliable. Other people have been going, actually, I want it. Interestingly, 22 kilowatts is about what you'll find in most European, you can find in Europe, 22 kilowatt or 11 kilowatt three-phase charging stations. And in many European countries, the UK is not one of them, unfortunately. You can even get three-phase in your home quite easily. We don't here in the UK. So it's an interesting one. All right, finally for the segment. And this is the story that you wanted to talk about at the top of the show, Joe. This is a scoop from our friends over at Green Car Reports on Friday. We'd already pushed our show, we're afraid, the TEN, the 10. So we didn't cover it on Friday's show, but we will put it in this week's show, or we put it in at some point. The Tesla battery swap station is expected to go live, or the first one, which is at Harris Ranch in California, is expected to go live sometime next week. Now, Joe, you're obviously a fan of battery swapping. I've actually experienced battery swapping firsthand at Better Place in Israel, but I don't think it's all that in a packet of crisps.
Why, before I make a comment on it, so why are you not in favor of it?
Because I kind of go back to what Paul was saying earlier on about ABC, always be charging. And the concept is, this is a car, the Tesla Model S is a car that can already do, if you buy the 85, you can already do 250 miles if you're careful with it on a charge.
Right.
And I think it's both, I'm going to just come out and say it. I think it's actually slightly irresponsible to drive 250 miles non-stop, stop for 5 minutes to switch your battery out and then carry on. I actually think if you have just driven 200 plus miles in your electric car or your gasoline car or your hydrogen fuel cell car, you need to stop for at least 45 minutes to mentally be ready for the next part of your journey. Now, when autonomous drive technology comes out, I think it will be different. And at that point, yes, battery swapping will make sense. But it just seems a bit of an overkill. And I frankly think Tesla should be focusing on other, more important things. What do you guys think? I'm going to shut up.
I think, Tesla is probably the ones to do it first. Obviously, they are doing it first. I have some firsthand experience with when always be charging doesn't always work, which, I make a long story short, I started with the availability of having level 2 charging in the apartment complex for my Nissan Leaf. I actually made it happen. I got them to put in level 2 chargers, and then they proceeded to raise the rent after that, even though, of course, that was provided free. And thus I moved and spent a year or more in an apartment complex. And I had no ability to really charge overnight. I tried to do it a couple of times with an extension cord, and the complex eventually said, you can't do that anymore. So I was limited to public charging only. Now, my employer had charging options available. They weren't always free because the stations were taken up. And then a number of months ago, we had the Blink debacle when they upped the prices. So I didn't always have the ability to always be charging, and it really affected my life, my social life, my ability. Right. I was always living on how far can I go and so forth.
And the fear of not being able to get there, I'm guessing as well.
That's right, or to get home.
Okay.
If there was the ability to do a battery swap, I think personally for people who live in apartment complexes, for people who live, obviously if you have a house, a rental house even, you still have the ability to do level 1 charging. But I think there's a lot of people who live in apartment complexes which are just not set up even to have a regular old 110 plug here in the US. And those people, if they don't have the ability to charge, say, at work, or have some inexpensive option along the way, stop at Starbucks or stop at somewhere for a coffee shop that might have charging, they're really going to play that same game. And those are the ones who are not going to switch because they're going to say, well, I don't have an option. What do you want me to walk around the mall for 5 hours waiting for the thing to charge? I did that, and it really sucked, to be honest.
It does.
I think there's certain segments that are not going to adopt EVs unless there's some other type of super fast option. And in the Phoenix area, we have very few level 3 stations, of which most are Blink, and they will charge you $9 now to recharge. So I think that battery swap technology is something that maybe it's not going to become the de facto standard, but I think it needs to be an option.
I hear what you're saying. And I think
for a certain group of people, yeah.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think for a certain group of people, that does make at least some sense from a basic point of view. But I think also one of the challenges here is it feels like the battery swap is a bit of an overkill when we should be looking at better redundancy. So,
sure.
One of the things in the UK that they've been working on recently, some of the charging networks, noticeably Ecotricity, is having redundancy on their sites. So they have one, instead of having just one charging station, they've now got 2, and unfortunately, that's not been going very well for them in certain areas. Certain parts of the UK still has terrible coverage because they're suffering because of the problems they're having from the charging stations, which we should point out Ecotricity didn't make. They acquired them from somewhere else, and so they're now they're desperately trying to make their network more reliable, and they really do want to make their network more reliable. But Tesla has superchargers. I've experienced supercharging at 300 miles an hour. And it's insane. I parked up the car, went to the loo and picked up a bowl of fruit, not bowl, those little pots of fruit you can get, bought one of those, sort of wandered back to the car, and the car was pretty much ready to go. I stopped and had a lovely chat to another Tesla driver, and then, I was gone, and it was less than 20 minutes, and it gave me enough range to carry on my trip. Now, interestingly, in the chat room, someone says, why assume that, you're always going to start with a full battery? That's a fair enough point. But it does feel that the price of the swapping, which is going to be about the same as a full tank of gas, it just feels like a distraction, Paul.
So the battery swapping thing, I was pretty much against it when Better Place was trying to do it, because the way I looked at it is, first of all, you're going to have to get all the OEMs to settle on the same battery in all their cars, which that's a non-starter. They're not going to do that. And in lieu of that, then you're going to have to stock at the battery swap station the types of batteries found in all the electric cars, which means you're going to have to buy several versions of each, keep them charged up, and then when the Ford comes in, you swap out the Ford. When the Toyota comes in, you swap out the Toyota. But, that's a huge inventory. So you've got to build the station, $1 million there. You've got to staff it. You've got to finance the acquisition of the inventory, the battery packs. And then when the car comes in to swap a battery, what have you sold them? Well, you only sold them the energy content in the battery. You had to buy that energy, mark it up. Let's say you mark it up 100%. You're going to make maybe $3. So where's the business case for this? I just don't see it. I think the solution, and I'll tell you, the reason why Elon's doing it is so he could get the better carb credits. So he just needed to demonstrate that he could do it, and then he's able to get these credits. So I think that's a good reason to show it. And Joe makes good points, and they're important. But I think the solution is in longer range cars. If his Leaf was second gen and was getting 180 miles range instead of 80 or 90, that would solve all of his problems right there.
Oh, it would. It would have, for sure. And I think we do have to get to these longer range cars, But again, it's a chicken and egg problem. We've got to get somewhere soon.
You're totally right.
And I agree with so the longer range cars, but also a more robust charging infrastructure. The fact that his landlord gave him grief on installing a charger, that's a big issue, and it's a real issue here in California as well, and everywhere else in the country. But that will be solved. The public pressure to install charging. Here in California, we did pass laws that mandate that you can install if you're in an apartment or a condo, and the HOA can't stop you, the landlord can't stop you, unless, and we had to compromise on one, if you're in a rent-controlled apartment in California, you do not have the legal right to install. But that was the concession we made in order to get the law passed for all the rest of the renters. So the solution lies in really pushing forth the charging infrastructure, particularly where people live. I mean, that's where you're parked the most. And then the second place is workplace charging. And that's coming along pretty well. So I think rather than build out, and do the engineering for all the cars to have battery swapping capability, that's going to involve a lot of re-engineering of the battery packs, and then setting up the swap stations is very expensive. If that money instead went into making fast charging ubiquitous and workplace charging ubiquitous, and allowing people to charge at home more, I think that solves all the problems.
It's going to be an interesting battle. I can see both sides of the argument. But I do maintain, I think I'm going to side with Paul on this one, Joe, I'm afraid. I think
if we had longer range cars, I would be totally fine with that.
Yeah. And I think that's coming, I think Tesla needs to really focus on the Gigafactory, because the Gigafactory is going to be the thing, if it's successful, that truly changes the way we think about vehicles and transportation, whether it be a plug-in hybrid. Imagine, we're already talking, the 2016 Volt's coming in 3 weeks' time. We're going to see it for the first time. And Chevy's been talking up some fantastic things that this car will do. Imagine if your plug-in hybrid, as a baseline, starts off with the same range that today's all-electric cars have. So instead of having a plug-in hybrid that does 40 miles in electric range and then turns on its gasoline engine. Imagine one that does 100 miles and then has a range extender. That is going to make far more difference to people than being able to swap your battery pack out. And I think Tesla is on a very, very dangerous line right now, because if it's not careful, it's going to set itself up as an elite automaker that's doing showy things just because it can. And
they're kind of like Apple, in a way.
And I think at this point it really needs to start thinking a little bit more about what the mainstream people need, and I think batteries that are affordable and can go a lot further are the important things. All right, let's have an ad break and we'll be right back with the last part of the show. Do you enjoy the show? Do you like wearing fun and unique clothes that support the things you love? Then you're going to want to head over to www.transportevolved.com/shop, where you can show support of Transport Evolved by buying one of our fabulous Transport Evolved branded apparel. We've got everything from hoodies and t-shirts to water bottles, badges and tote bags, and they'll be sent direct from our partners at Spreadshirt to your home address in double quick time. What's more, by buying something from our shop, you'll be sending us a little kickback as a thanks for our hard work on the show. And you'll get something unique and fun, and we'll get some warm, fuzzy feelings knowing we can continue to bring you a great show every week. What's not to love? We are back. Sorry, I was having a bit of a chat there in the chat room and got a bit late. All right. Final segment of the show. Audi this week confirmed that the 2015 Q7 full-size SUV, not exactly what you'd think of when you think of an efficient future vehicle, is going to be coming in range-topping plug-in hybrid mode. And the previous week, Volvo started talking pricing and specifications of its XC90 full-size SUV, and the T8, which is the top-of-the-range model, also comes as a plug-in hybrid. Now, the difference between these two vehicles is that the T8 is a gasoline plug-in hybrid, range-topping high-end model, and the Audi Q7 e-tron Quattro is a plug-in diesel hybrid with a V6 diesel engine. Audi says it's the first V6 diesel plug-in hybrid on the market, but it's a really interesting vehicle because it started a trend, or there is now a trend. I think we can now safely say there's a trend in high-end, high-performance vehicles that are using plug-in drivetrains as a way of satisfying ever-increasing emissions targets. I don't know what to make of these vehicles, because on one side I'm glad that they're getting people plugging in, but on the other side there's a little voice in me that's going, well, this vehicle is not giving enough of the future technology in order to make a real difference from an environmental point of view. Now, I'm an environmentalist. I'm also a tech person. I'm also a journalist. So I find it hard to try and figure out where I should be putting my hat on this one. I'm going to ask you guys what you think. Now, Paul, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask you to give me your opinion.
Anything with a plug is a good thing.
Right.
We're going to baby steps a lot here at the beginning, and we're still at the beginning of all this, but we've got to get more people into plugging in their car. And I see both of these as being very beneficial. It, first of all, gives that particular OEM more experience in building these cars. And obviously the goal would be to increase the all-electric range continuously. So once they've got one on the market, like the Porsche Panamera is a plug-in now, and these other high-end cars, you know, you're attracting customers who, other than Tesla, are not being addressed. And they tend to be high gasoline users because their cars are gas hogs, you know, all of them, the high performance cars are. So if you could put a plug on it and get them to drive on electricity a little bit, it'll only improve until the battery costs are low enough that everybody is on long distance, driving long distance, fully electric cars that are fast charge capable. And that's the end goal. So I see it as a very good thing.
All right. I can understand that. That was exactly what I thought you were going to say, by the way. I'm going to be a devil's advocate at this point, and I'm going to cite the plug-in Prius in California, which has what's between 6 or 15 miles, depending on how you measure it, of range. And a lot of people in California are buying it. And we've talked to, our good friend Chelsea Sexton, who comes on the show a lot, has said, she has heard people saying they're just buying it for the California zero emission, or the ZEV credit, not the ZEV credits, the ZEV perk, or the PZEV credits, or being able to drive in the carpool lane is essentially what I'm saying. Now, some people are really against these cars because they don't have enough range, they're big, they're kind of the antithesis of what we need. And as a society, there are so many people out there who own big SUVs who genuinely don't need them. So my question to you is, should these vehicles be treated on an even, should they be treated equally to other plug-in hybrids or all-electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles? Where do we make the differentiation? Do we let people have credits for these cars for buying them rather than their standard V8? Do we give them a partial credit? Do we give them a slight pat on the back, or do we give them a hugging embrace and tell them you're one of us?
Well, if I might, I would like to see the incentives based on the battery size, so that if you have an incentive at the beginning that's a rebate like we have in California, it should be based on how many kilowatt hours are in the pack, and should start very small. Like I was disappointed that Toyota had such a small battery in their plug-in hybrid, but it's better than nothing. And so they should get a credit, but not full credit. So I think that's how you need to do it, to incentivize them by giving them more credit for certain levels of kilowatt hour capacity. And then, that's how you drive it. But, in the long goal, even a 10-mile range all electric serves a lot of people. They can drive to and from work very easily without using any gas, but that's the minimum. I certainly don't advise that. I think you should get at least 25 to 40 miles minimum on most cars.
So what you're saying is that I should stop worrying about my family's use of their vehicles, because at the moment, my wife's currently working about 40, 50 miles away. And she started driving the Leaf to and from work, but she got a bit of range anxiety because it was getting really cold. Our Leaf's not got the range in it that it used to have. And, we had a bad experience at the charging station. And so she said, right, I'm going to start taking the Volt. She drives the Volt to work. There's a charging station about 3 blocks away. She drives there, plugs it in, and then at lunchtime she goes and picks the Volt up and drives it back home. She's getting about 115 mpge over the course of the day. Me in my little head going, but you should be driving it all electric all the time. So am I being too harsh?
It's just a matter of having charging at work. That's an easy fix. If she's got a charger 3 blocks away, that's not super convenient, but it's not bad. And she could drive the Leaf and plug it in and go pick it up at lunch. And I don't see how she couldn't have enough range for that. I don't get that.
Big hills. That's what it is. It's big hills. Okay. Joe, what are your views on these vehicles? You've been very quiet so far.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes. It's hard to jump in when you can't see the other side of the video. And I know you're eventually working on that. I do agree that these credits should be on a sort of a graduated scale. If you've got these, let's face it, the high performance cars, certain groups of people are always going to buy them, whether at some point they will be all electric, years from now, but people are always going to buy these high performance cars. And it is great that they are coming in plug-in hybrid versions, although we would say that they are like mild hybrids at this point, because they're just doing a little bit to have that plug on there, to have the batteries in there, but that's about it. So they should have a very small credit. Heck, if they're these crazy high performance vehicles, maybe they shouldn't have any credit. It's like, okay, you bought a vehicle, has had some additional tech in it, but really it doesn't do much for the environment because it's still probably using way more, fuel than, a regular plug-in hybrid. I was also disappointed, a couple of years ago when Toyota did come out with that plug-in Prius that only got, a handful of miles in all-electric mode. And I was disappointed simply because Toyota was the one who really, brought hybrids into the mainstream, and they just seemed like they've just fallen flat They are obviously pushing the hydrogen vehicle, which I know you've got a story in there about.
That's next.
I don't know what we're going to see next from Toyota and the Prius. I think it's very dated and old at this point. You know, I opted to not get the next generation when it came out. I kept my generation 2 when I got it in late 2004. I kept it for 8 years. I was very happy with it. I think the Prius is kind of an old. They just made variations of it now, so I don't know what the heck their next.
Well, you know, they are holding it back now, Joe. They're holding it back for the reveal because they've realised that it's not quite up to spec. I think that's where it's going.
Yeah.
Someone was asking me, and I know that Paul was asking me about. Well, how can you not go all that way on a Leaf? Range, heat, and the fact that my wife tends to drive at the limit.
There you go.
Just going to leave it at that.
Operator
here. Yeah. We can still get 60 out of it if we're careful. But to be fair, when she's in a hurry to work, she doesn't really want to think about. And it does.
The first rule of hypermiling is allow time to get where you're.
That's the one.
Right.
Unfortunately, doesn't always allow. All right. So, science of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And I am aware that we're running quite over on the show today, but I'm going to allow you guys a little bit of time to talk about this. Toyota this week published an infomercial in which it seemed to indicate, and I'm being very careful about my words here, that the carbon footprint of a hydrogen fuel cell car was either equal or better than that of an electric vehicle. Paul, Plug-in America, got very upset about it, as did other people. And Toyota sort of came back, one of its spokespeople said, as long as you're talking from the same energy source.
No.
Now, what's going on with Toyota, first of all? And you know, there's been an ongoing battle on the Transport Evolved website between hydrogen fans and electric car fans. Maybe you can wrap this up for me and tell me, A, why everyone was so upset, and B, is there ever a conceivable point in the future where hydrogen fuel cell and electric vehicle drivers could be friends?
Well, drivers can be friends. I got no problem with somebody driving a car, but I have a problem with an OEM lying, and that's what Toyota did, is they lied. And when I was asked for a quote for the Autoblog Green story, I just said, show me the math. You know, they made a blanket statement that a fuel cell car is more efficient than an electric car, battery electric. And, you know, I want to see the math because I've seen a lot of math on this. Joe Rahm particularly has been really good about this. And so every way I've seen hydrogen acquired, the math shows that the efficiency of the battery electric is substantially better. We're not talking 10% better. We're talking 200 to 300 to as much as 400% better. So if Toyota makes this statement like they did, then we have to call them out on it. They're lying. And if they want to sue me for calling them liars, you know, they know where I live. But, you know, I will get into court and I will say, show me the math. And it doesn't exist.
It doesn't add up, does it? And here at Transport Evolved, we did a bit of investigating as to how much energy it would cost to generate the hydrogen that is required to power 60 miles in a Mirai, which is about 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And it's something like 56 kilowatt hours of electricity for 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And there have been people arguing with me this week saying, well, yeah, but if it's generated from solar panels have zero carbon footprint. So technically Toyota's right. You know, if you're taking this vehicle and you're charging up the solar panels and you're using that solar panel energy to, you know, electrolyze your water to get your hydrogen, then technically, as long as you fill it up at the point where it's generated, then yes, it's going to have the same carbon footprint. And then I just turn around and say, we're conflating the issue here. We're talking about carbon footprints and energy efficiency. They are two different things.
That's right.
So,
yeah, so for that proverbial hydrogen station with the solar, they have to have 4 times as much solar to generate the same amount of energy to travel a given distance as a battery electric car. Yeah. So it's efficiency versus carbon footprint. You know, the carbon footprint, yeah, it would be zero no matter what. But why would you want to spend 4 times as much money or 4 times as much energy to do the same job?
Right, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that people are forgetting about this story is it's more about the energy efficiency. Then, because obviously Toyota will pick the most environmentally friendly way of generating hydrogen, just like electric vehicle advocates pick the most environmentally friendly way of generating electricity. But again, we're back to headlines. We're back to this soundbite culture that we no longer as a society bother about picking apart the minutiae of what is actually meant and where the studies are actually coming from and where the maths comes from, which is exactly what you were saying, Paul. The maths doesn't add up, but hey, it makes for a good soundbite, doesn't it?
Well, when you're trying to fool people, to lie to people, you do whatever you want. And that's what they're doing here. They're lying.
All right.
I guess...
Go on, carry on, Jay.
I can just make a couple comments. For years, we've sort of... the hydrogen has been this sort of elusive, goal of that it's going to be the world's perfect energy source and it'll solve every problem. And it just outputs water vapor, and fuel cells are absolutely incredible. And obviously, it works in the space program, on the space station and so forth, but the space station is not trying to power a traditional vehicle down here, nor the shuttle. It's a completely different technology platform. The question, I guess, is, ultimately we get to, with battery electric vehicles, we get to much better, much more energy dense batteries that probably have even better lifetimes in terms of how many charge cycles they will endure before they degrade to where you have to replace them or they go to grid storage. The only thing I would say, at some point, perhaps what has occurred with the fact that the math doesn't add up currently is that maybe these fuel cells, the efficiency of the cells themselves in terms of how much hydrogen is going to produce how much energy, maybe the efficiency of the fuel cells has simply just not increased enough. And at some point it will have to, for it to be a viable option. And at some point you could look at, well, how much actual physical material has to go into a fuel cell and how long will it last, based on the same type of, how much actual physical resources, material goes into a battery pack. And how long will it last if it was charged from the same, type of source, if it was a solar, so that you've got apples to apples comparison. Right. Obviously, right now the math doesn't add up in its favor. I've always thought that hydrogen was this magical end goal, and maybe we'll still get there. Maybe it still is the end goal, and that there's another breakthrough that has to happen. But the same could be said for battery technology. Right. We've all heard the same thing. Oh, magical batteries are just around the corner, but where are they? I hear. Sorry, Joe. I hear exactly what you're saying. I am going to bring one thing up. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Orion, the new rocket that's being built for for going to Mars. It just did a test flight.
I don't know if you know this. Orion ditched hydrogen fuel cells.
Really?
Yes.
In favor of
so Apollo had hydrogen fuel cells, but Orion uses batteries. So there you go. So that's an interesting thing. But I agree that we need to keep an open mind moving forward. I think that's I'm paraphrasing what you were saying there. We need to keep an open mind moving forward, and I'm sure everyone will agree. If things change, if the technologies change, and there is a phenomenal breakthrough that no one's quite ready for, then we might look at it. At the moment, though, cost analysis benefit and the energy disparity between the energy efficiencies of these vehicles is very clear. However, I'm going to come into the third level here and say that I think something like the Volkswagen A7 H-tron Quattro is a potential application into the future of using this technology in very specific circumstances. For example, I could see it working as a range extending option for emergency vehicles. If you needed a vehicle that you could guarantee could run for an extended period of time, beyond the range of the batteries. I'm not talking about a plug-in hydrogen vehicle that could only do 100 miles on a charge. I'm talking about one that could maybe do 250 miles on a charge and then absolutely had to be able to do 500 miles in a particular situation. Or I'm talking about a vehicle that needs to operate remotely. Then those situations, yes, I can allow for a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle to operate at a higher inefficiency. But for everyday people, everyday scenarios, right now it doesn't add up. I think that's where I'm at. Is there anything else either of you want to add to this story before we go on to our last two?
Yeah, I would like to, whenever people talk about hydrogen fuel cell cars, they say Hyundai is selling them and Toyota's going to be selling them and so forth. But, nobody ever says how many Hyundai has sold. And I think that's a really pertinent issue. They're bragging about selling them, and nobody understands they're not selling them. They're only leasing them, and you can't buy them. And I think they only made 60 of them, but I haven't had that confirmed. No journalist that I know of has bothered to contact them to ask what they're doing. How many have they sold?
I think
they're only in like California or only certain test markets still, I think.
And it's like the early days of no one wants to say anything. No one wants to say, I mean, I've spoken to Hyundai about it and they won't tell me even how much the people are leasing them for in the UK. So that shows you where it is. All right. 3 weeks' time, 2016 Chevy Volt will debut at the 2015 NAIAS in Detroit. This week, we learned a little bit more about it. We already know about the engine. We already know about the more efficient drivetrain. We already know it's going to have a better range. It's going to have better fuel economy. This week, we learned that it has user-adjustable paddle shift regeneration, which it's got from the Cadillac ELR. My question at this point is, why is it taking these automakers such a long time, Paul, to cotton on to the fact that people want to be able to have more control about how their vehicle operates? Do you think this is a good thing? And you've been around plugging in since the first generation EV1, RAV4 EV and the ill-fated EV1, and both and the EV1 had a coast feature, didn't it? And it gave you much more control over driving.
Yeah, I think Tesla's driving this because their aggressive regen is remarkable, and people love it. Once you get used to it, it's like you don't want to go back to not having it. I've also had the pleasure of riding a Vectrix for many years with the regen and the throttle, and I think all the electric motorcycles need to do that as well. So the rider needs to have control over the regen, how much power you get out of it. And I think if it's fully adjustable, that's what you want. That's absolutely better than not having it. I also rode the RAV a lot without any regen. So we had 2 regen settings plus no regen. And I learned to drive on the freeway very efficiently without it. It takes some time to learn, but I liked it. And then when you want the regen, it's right there. So that's the best, to be able to have 0 regen up to 100% and have it driver controlled.
And I like the e-Golf for that very reason, because it has that multiple levels of regenerative braking. Interestingly, when I'm driving, and it drives my other half up the wall, when I'm driving the Volt, when I'm driving the Leaf, I shift between D and L and N in the Volt, and between N and B and D in the Leaf.
Because I do the same. They do the same thing.
And I can extend my range. I can still get 60-ish, maybe even 70. Last summer, I got 70-something miles out of my Leaf, which has lost 20% of its original battery capacity. It's got nearly 67,000 miles on the clock now. At the time, I think it was about 57,000. And it still did it. It still went the distance, because as I have improved my driving capabilities, my battery is degraded, but actually the amount of range I can still get out of the car is pretty much the same. I just wonder why it took Chevy such a long time to do it. I'm glad it's coming. What else do we expect?
These features just need to be there for people who want to have control of these things, especially people who are new to these types of vehicles. I, like you were saying in your Leaf, I use the B and the D option, and also I will jump in and out of eco mode on occasion if I really have to make some fast decisions on freeways and whatnot. When I drove to California in September, I rented a car that was not. It was literally a traditional internal combustion non-hybrid vehicle, which was awful, to be honest. And there was no regen, and I thought there was something wrong with the car. I was so used to it, whether it was on the Leaf or my old Prius, and I know on the I think the BMW, the i3, you could basically almost do one pedal driving, and I think it's great. When I don't have it, it just seems like it's something that should be on all vehicles.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know what the other details of what they were announced, other than that the paddle thing this week with the adjustable regen on the Volt. But they've just been showing us little glimpses. So it'll be interesting to see what the vehicle fully looks like and all the other new stuff.
I think this is intentional to try and slow down sales of the current Volt, but also to try and get the hype up. I mean, it's what gadget makers do all the time, isn't it? Apart from Apple, who have Apple under Steve Jobs never did that, but Apple under Tim Cook is doing that. Look, we're going to make this watch. We're going to show it to you now, and you're going to want it by the time it arrives.
Well, they did that with the iPhone. To be fair, the iPhone
they did actually. Yeah, you're
6
right.
months ahead. Yeah, so I mean
that
right. We'll see.
I'm interested to know if
works.
the new Volt is going to be more normal enough to get more people behind the wheel, and that's going to be an interesting thing. But I think actually it's not about being normal; it's about training the dealers, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, you've gone all pixelated there. You've gone the video is not very good. All right, BMW is set to unveil a whole new set of driver benefits at the NAIAS coming up for BMW i3 and i8 owners in the US. And it seems that it's now stopped plans. It's not going to unveil its hydrogen fuel cell platform as it said it was going to. But the interesting thing is the most interesting technology that BMW is due to unveil in January is actually going to be unveiled at the CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. And that is going to be the autonomous parking and self-driving features. With the news that Volvo is pulling out of all of these auto shows, Volvo said it's only going to, from now on, attend 2 or 3 in the year. Do we think that the auto show is dead? You know, if we want to find evolved transport, do we need to go somewhere else, like CES? Joe?
Let's see. Well, I've been to, I really haven't been to full-size car shows, but I've definitely been to CES in the last decade. And there was a larger and larger section of auto-related stuff and vehicle showcase. Back in the day, years ago, it was really more related to like audio systems and your giant subwoofer systems and all these crazy vehicles. But I do think that we could see that more and more in the Consumer Electronics Show, because as we were talking about earlier in the show, we may see in coming years where the vehicle itself, especially for electric vehicles, perhaps doesn't change all that often over time, except with software upgrades. And I think we're going to start seeing that now with the release of Apple's CarPlay and the Android, I think it's called Android in the Car, systems that kind of integrate with existing vehicle systems as well. I think cars are going to get a lot more software reliant, and that's what's really going to change. They'll be able to push out updates that will adjust your driving experience and your features, because at some point, there's only so many more things that they can put in cars, right? I mean, we've had power windows and locks and all these other feature comforts, and the technology for autonomous driving and whatnot is becoming more of a thing. Perhaps it'll become a standard that'll just be implemented, and it'll just be adjusted. Will car shows completely die? Not in the near future, but perhaps eventually everything does become a CES. But CES is not open to the public either. So I guess some car shows are not either. So that it's a moot point.
I can see it moving towards CES. And someone in the chat room says, tell us about Electra Girl's experience with her i3. One of our columnists, Electra Girl, as you know, Pamela Thwaite, Michael Thwaite's wife, wrote a piece yesterday about her i3. And they've had some problems with their BMW i3. And reading it does get that feeling that the BMW i3, the sheen has been lost for them on the BMW i3. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn there. But it maybe I do wonder if it's much easier for an automaker to go to a gadget show and show off a future fuel, an autonomous drive technology, even fledgling technology that isn't maybe ready for the market yet, isn't quite ready for prime time. It's much, much easier for them to wow audiences who aren't car audiences than it is to go to an auto show and compete against these other technologies. Paul, what's your opinion on this?
I Joe that in the near term you're still going to have auto shows. Pardon me, but in the long term, I think they're going to fade out because the advent of autonomous driving technology is going to be so ubiquitous. People won't even own cars anymore. There's no need to own a car because the buying a service, say an Uber type service with an autonomous car, is going to be cheaper. And it's going to be so much cheaper that, if you really enjoy driving in traffic and not being able to get work done while you're commuting, then maybe you'll continue to drive your own car. But most people will quickly, switch over to an autonomous service that allows them to do work or to sleep or whatever they want to do. So I would think this transition is going to start probably within 10 years, but certainly by 10 years. And then it will happen pretty quickly. Between 10 and 20 years, I would think most people will be switching over and just dumping the ownership of their car because it's going to be way too expensive compared to the alternative.
And you know what? I think Uber will work when we have autonomous cars. But it's the only time I'm ever going to get in an Uber. If it's driving itself, then yes. As long as Uber doesn't write the, leering in the passenger thing in there. All right, and finally, for today's show, and this is one really that doesn't need any comment, but I'm just mentioning it because I think it's totally cool, and I hope you guys appreciate it. The Tesla Model S is based on Linux, not the car itself, but the computer inside is based on Linux. And that's very different to a lot of modern future cars which have Microsoft embedded systems or other proprietary systems on them. The Tesla Model S is based on Linux, and its center console, touchscreen display, and the computer that's incorporated in that is essentially just a PC, a very high-end PC. High-end double graphics cards, all the works. And the Tesla Model S has 2 USB sockets that you can plug your memory sticks into to play your music or your smartphone to charge it while you're driving along. And a team of Tesla owners have been doing some really fun things. They've been trying to figure out what they can plug in to their Tesla Model S. And I feel that this maybe should be a web series. What are we going to plug into our Tesla Model S today? It could be any number of USB powered things like the USB Rock or, But this guy, and we've got the video in the show notes, plugged in a USB mouse and discovered that it could work on the screen. And then he tried a USB keyboard. That didn't work. He tried a CD-ROM drive. That didn't work. But he plugged in a floppy drive, a USB floppy disk drive. The old 3.5-inch floppy disk drive.
But, and I have a prop for this, would it work with one of these?
That's a 5 3/4, yes? That's
right. Is there a USB floppy drive that you could plug? You could put a 5 1/4 into your modern Tesla.
That's a challenge. Joe has laid it down. Or maybe a USB tape drive. You'd need to probably make some form of USB controller to work. Drive. Cassette tape drive. And you could
interface your TRS-80 into your Tesla.
That is so cool. And on that note, I'm going to say that's it for today's show. Thanks very much, Paul, for joining us. Where can people find out more about you?
Sunpowered, SUNPWRD @gmail.com is how to contact me. And to find out more about me, you can just Google my name. I give talks around the country a lot.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thanks very much for joining us. And Joe, I must say, Joe, you're using an iPhone at the moment, aren't you? As your video.
Yes.
It is the most clear, crystal clear, perfect image I think we've ever had from a guest on the show.
This is an iPhone 7 from the future. No, I'm just kidding. It's an iPhone 5S, but I do a lot with trying to get the most quality out of my videos that I do for my own stuff, which for people who want to follow me, they can look up NIDOCAMEN at all of the things online. You can also find me at Lighting Answers. The address for that is actually answers.lighting, where I talk about things like LED light bulbs, home automation, the Internet of Things, lighting design, and whatnot.
Okay.
Usually about every week.
And we've put you down as lightinganswers.blogspot.com also works, doesn't it?
Yeah. You can get there, although I don't really blog there much, but there's a link to the videos on YouTube. You can find it on YouTube too.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for joining us. And you do have an excellent video. I've just been looking at the Blackmagic cameras. I'm lusting after the new Blackmagic cameras because they're very good. Yeah. And a friend of mine has been lusting after it also. I do hope, obviously this is the last show before the holiday officially starts for most people. I hope you are having, I'm going to give you the list. I hope you have had a happy Festivus, or you will have a happy Festivus, happy Christmas. I hope you're having a happy Hanukkah if you are celebrating that. And for those who are celebrating Kwanzaa, have a wonderful week as well. We will be back next week with our kind of wrap up of the year show. It will be very, very informal. And we'll maybe be talking about some new stuff for 2015 as well. Nearly said 2016 there. It's because of 2016 model year cars. That's why my brain is saying 2016 when it's actually 2015. This week, the Transport Evolved site will continue Monday and Tuesday. We are not going to be publishing the full number of stories, partly because it's the holidays, and I think those of us who work on the site need a break, but also because I've got my kids home and it's Christmas or Festivus or Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever else you happen to be celebrating. And I think it's that time of year when you want to spend some time with your family. So I hope you'll all understand. We will hopefully have an outtake version of TEN on Friday. I can't tell you what's going to be in it yet, but it's going to be good. And until next time, folks, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.